I've been walking with my face turned to the sun. Weight on my shoulders, a bullet in my gun. Oh, I got eyes in the back of my head, just in case I have to run. I do what I can when I can, while I can for my people. While the clouds roll back and the stars fill the night, that's when I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep it on, I can feel it in my bones. Early in the morning, before the sun begins to shine, we're gonna start moving towards that separating line. I'm wading through muddy waters. You know I got a made up mind, and I don't mind if I lose any blood on the way to salvation. And I'll fight with the strength that I got until I die. So I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. And I know what's around the bend might be hard to face 'cause I'm old, and I just might fail, but Lord knows I'll try. Sisters, fill up the sky. Stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Do you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. I hear freedom calling me to answer. Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones. I go to prepare a place for you. I go to prepare a place for you. I go to prepare a place for you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Lewis, Associate Dean for Equity and Inclusion and Associate Professor at the School of Nursing, University of Pennsylvania. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our annual commemoration to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Nursing and Social Justice, Past, Present, and Future Legacies. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dean Antonia M. Villarruel, who will be giving opening remarks. Dean Villarruel is the Margaret Bond Simon Dean of Nursing and the Director of the WHO Collaborating Center for Nursing and Midwifery Leadership. She is our 6th Dean and the first one to serve with prior and current NIH funding. A Penn Nursing alumna herself and only the 2nd alumna to serve as Dean. Among her extremely long list of accomplishments, she is a former president of the National Association of Hispanic Nurses and a founding member of the National Coalition of Ethnic Minority Nurse Associations. Dean Villarruel is a pioneering nurse researcher whose work helped to improve the health of underserved Latinx communities. She is definitely one of our social justice warriors, and she will share with us now a few remarks to open up our program. Dean Villarruel.
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks to all of you who are joining us for this event. I'm really excited to see the variety of folk that we have joining us. I see students, I see faculty, I see alums, I see parents, and I see friends. This is an important event for us as we honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When we think about Dr. King, we easily fall back on his work of desegregation and civil rights. But the movement he started and mobilized was about much more. It was about fighting to right economic, education, housing, job, healthcare, and voting inequities, not only in the US, but in solidarity with the world. These are issues that are still relevant today in 2021 as we see the inequities are persistent and even worsened. Nurses and midwives, through our research, practice, education, and advocacy, are an important component of efforts to eliminate health disparities and achieve health equity. And we must do this within and outside the healthcare system. We must be engaged citizens. Nowhere is this more obvious than advancing social justice. And this is particularly true at Penn Nursing, where our values and mission encourage and challenge us to be leaders in work to dismantle structural racism in nursing, healthcare, and the world in which we live. We are inspired and proud of our efforts of our students and alums to address health equity and social justice. Yet we all recognize there's lots of work to be done, and we will take advantage of our current climate to do even better. As MLK famously said, "We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but bends towards justice." But we also must be cautioned that it doesn't bend on its own. We have to pull on it. I'm grateful to have the opportunity that today's panel discussion on nursing and social justice give us. And I'd like to thank Dr. Lisa Lewis, Penn Nursing's Associate Dean for Equity and Inclusion, for pulling today's event together, as well as Melina Lopez, Lisa's co-host for today, and an extraordinary Penn Nursing student and president of the Minority Nursing Organization. So many of our students, like Melina, have prioritized social justice efforts alongside their studies and other commitments this past years. And I'm so grateful, Melina, to you and to all our students for their work and inspiration. I want to thank our Office of Institutional Advancement and everyone who supported this event, including our Office of Alumni Relations. I'd also like to thank our great panelists for today's event for making time. They will be formally introduced in a moment, but I'd like to point out that in addition to their nursing career accomplishments, they are all proud Penn alum, and they're individuals who inspire me. Paule Joseph, for example, just published in Science. Jasmine Perez is a campus leader and midwife extraordinaire. Adriana Nava recently stepped up as president of the National Association of Hispanic Nurses, and I know there are many of non-members here to cheer you on. And Valerie Bai, who again is a staff nurse extraordinary with at Penn Medicine and at Penn Presbyterian. Finally, it is good to have Barbara Nichols, an extraordinary member of Penn Nursing's Board of Advisors for nearly 10 years. She is a living legend and has been a mentor to me since I was in grad school, and I'm not going to tell you how many years ago that was. I look forward to their thoughts on the intersection of nursing and social justice, as well as the future of nursing and their social justice movement. These conversations are especially important to have right now, the continuation of the Year of the Nurse and Midwife, as well as the ongoing pandemic shine a bright light on our work as frontline healthcare providers, research and policymakers, and new and continuing conversations in the public sphere about racism, injustice, and governance give context to our work as well. Now, more than ever, furthering our efforts to be a solution to achieving equity and justice in healthcare and beyond is crucial, and I thank you for taking part. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Melina and Lisa.
Thank you so much, Dean Villarreal. And so now we will spend some time introducing you to our panelists in a little bit more depth. But first, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to my co-moderator, Melina Mel Lopez. Melina is a third-year nursing student from Dallas in the traditional BSN program here at Penn Nursing. Minoring in gender, sexuality, and women's studies, Mel aspires to become a public health nurse that caters towards women's and gender-related health. On campus, they are a part of Mujeres Empoderadas, Minorities in Nursing Organization, and Sigma Lambda Upsilon, Señoritas Latinas Unidad Sorority Incorporated. In fact, she is president of the Minorities in Nursing Organization. So thank you, Mel, for accepting my ask to co-moderate with you. Dr. Barbara Nichols joins us by phone. She has vast experience in executive leadership and international initiatives. Her professional career spans 4 decades in leadership and policy-making positions in professional associations and related health organizations. Throughout her career, she has been a solid champion for the need to value diversity in all of its forms and a leading advocate for ethnic minority inclusion in all aspects of the health profession. In the organization's 100 years, she was the first Black president of the American Nurses Association. She is the former CEO of CGFNS International and is a past president of the Wisconsin Nurses Association. She currently serves as the diversity coordinator for the Wisconsin Center for Nursing, is a visiting associate professor of nursing at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and is the recipient of 5 honorary doctoral degrees. She is a living legend of the American Academy of Nursing, and Penn Nursing is proud to have her as one of its board of advisors. Dr. Paule V is the Lasker Clinical Research Scholar, tenure-track investigator, and chief of the Sensory Science and Metabolism Unit at the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, with a joint appointment with the National Institute of Nursing Research. Her lab examines the interplay between metabolic disorders, sensory-related pathways, and health, and she and her team conduct preclinical, clinical, and translational studies aimed at enhancing the understanding of molecular, cellular, neural, and behavioral mechanisms underlying sensory and metabolic disorders in the context of obesity and addiction. Dr. Joseph is deeply committed to diversity and inclusion, and in her many and community and global initiatives, draws upon her personal experiences as an Afro-Caribbean Latina born and raised in Venezuela to Haitian parents. Her visionary leadership of national and global nonprofits has focused on increasing the promotion of health within underserved populations. She currently serves as Vice President of the Amazing Grace Children's Foundation, based in Ghana. She received her PhD from Penn Nursing with a focus on genomics in 2015, and while here served as a graduate associate for Harnwell College of Health.
Jasmine Perez is a certified midwife at Atlantic Care in New Jersey. As a nurse and midwife, Jasmine's goal is to help bridge health gaps for the underserved, particularly among Latin American women. She also helps them become advocates for their own health and personal needs through education and introduce birthing balls, as well as aromatherapy and nitrous oxide laboring alternatives at her medical center. Jasmine recently worked on a grant-funded county initiative aimed at decreasing maternal morbidity and mortality for Black women and disadvantaged women in her region. While at Penn, she served as a resident advisor for Harnwell College House, and she received the Student Leadership Award from the Association of Latino Alumni. Jasmine graduated with her BSN in 2008 and her master's in nurse-midwifery in 2010 from Penn Nursing. Dr. Adriana Nava is Chief of Quality and Systems Improvement within the Veterans Health Administration and has been in service to our nation's veterans for most of her career in various nursing roles that include ICU nurse, cardiology research nurse, and quality management. She is honored to serve veterans and ensures that high-quality care is delivered to these heroes every day. Dr. Nava has also served the Latino community as a member and leader within the National Association of Hispanic Nurses and currently serves as the organization's president. She is proud to be the first millennial nurse elected to serve the membership at the national level. Dr. Nava has been invited to sit on city task forces, advisory committees, and work groups to share her knowledge about healthcare and represent nursing in the Latino community. For the impact of her work, she has been awarded the 2020 Secretary of Veterans Affairs Award for Excellence in Nursing, the 2019 and 2020 U.S. Latino Leadership Fellowship from the Center for Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School, and the 2017 NAHN's 40 Under 40 Recognition Award, to just name a few. While in the MSN program at Penn Nursing, she was a member of Onda Latina, the salsa performing dance team. Dr. Nava received her MSN in Health Leadership from Penn Nursing in 2012. Valerie Bai, BSN RN, is a medical surgical nurse at Penn Presbyterian Health Center. Her pronouns are she, her, hers. She previously lived in Cleveland, Ohio, where she organized with the Ohio Students Association and a community coalition working to end the abuse of incarcerated individuals at the Cuyahoga County Jail. She is also a member of Police Free Penn and a newly trained birth doula. Her time at Penn epitomized social advocacy and justice. She held leadership roles, serving as president for Penn's Minorities in Nursing organization and as a member of Penn's Spice Collective, an organization founded to explore and celebrate the intersection of race and gender in the Asian American women's community here at Penn. Valerie is currently sub-matriculated into our Family Nurse Practitioner program and graduated with her BSN from Penn Nursing in 2018.
So, hearing all of that, I hope you all 112 of you, are as excited as we are to listen and learn from these brilliant minds who walk all spaces of the nursing profession. We thought it would be appropriate to start our conversation given recent events, past events over the last year related to the killings of George Floyd and others, the election, the insurrection that happened earlier this month, just everything that's happened this year. And we didn't think we could start a conversation about social justice in nursing without giving our panelists an opportunity to share a few thoughts about these events. Dr. Nichols, I think you are still with us. Would you like to share thoughts?
Yes. Well, what I've gleaned from the events that have happened is the significance of intentionality and the ability to translate intentionality into action. And in order for that to happen, it requires that we each listen more deeply as we seek to understand more fervently, and that we find then a way to contribute with passion and action. So I think the question becomes, the time for talking is over. The question becomes, what is the action that you are going to take? And so that's what I've gleaned from the recent events. In the space you hold, what is your intent, but more relevant, what action can you, will you do in terms of looking at social justice? And I think a lot depends upon where you are. So that's kind of what I've gleaned. Intentionality and action are critical to addressing issues of racism, and then looking at mechanisms that deal with inclusivity and equity. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Nichols. The time for talking is over. Really love that statement. Valerie, would you like to reflections last year?
Yes, and I just want to say thank you so much for having me with this really wonderful, distinguished group of panelists. I want to hold space for everyone, but especially healthcare providers in this past year. I think there's really not been a time for anyone to breathe and really process what has happened. I personally feel a lot of anger at the events of the last year, and I also want to recognize that the issues with racism and police brutality in our country are not new, and they've been building for many, many, many years. And I think there's a quote by Dr. King that I feel like is very pertinent to our conversation that I wanted to share. It's that we must recognize we can't solve our problems now until there is a radical redistribution of economic and political power. This means a revolution of values and other things. We must see now that the evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism are all tied together. You can't really get rid of one without getting rid of the others, and the whole structure of American life must be changed. So I am really, like I said, trying to process the grief and the trauma personally of seeing people that I love losing loved ones to COVID, and seeing friends and the community around me, particularly the Black community, continue to suffer under state violence. And I feel a lot of disconnect between the day-to-day of my life, being able to go to my job and come home, and also holding that with the reality of people suffering, struggling with employment and unstable housing. And I am really encouraged also by the way that people have shown up for their neighbors and communities through protests, through mutual aid, community food shares, things like that. And I really appreciate how Dr. Nichols said the time for action is now. And to that end, I would like to say we definitely need to defund and abolish the police.
Thank you, Valerie. Dr. Adriana, any reflections for us?
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and participate with all of the speakers today. So the recent events, they really highlighted the fear that many minorities continue to face, and their voices have often been taken for granted or silenced. So I'm very proud of my family and colleagues who have had the courage to share their stories and bring it to light and surface it. The recent events have also highlighted for me how deeply divided our nation is, and I've seen how this division has infiltrated throughout our organizations, within our families, and between friends, where many people are hurt with different perspectives, and communication has essentially stopped. So there is a lot of work to be done, and especially us as nursing leaders, to listen and to find strategies to bring us all together. Because if we really want to be effective with social change and justice, we need to focus on improving outcomes, but we need to do it together.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adriana. Jasmine, what reflections do you have for us?
Hi, thank you for having me as well. so much has happened, I think, in the last year, and especially in the last 4 years, that I think has really caused us to need to refocus our lens a bit on the reality of this country and on the reality of the injustices on Black bodies. I think one of the good things that has come out of it is the need for all of us to really focus in and address our own biases in the workplace and in our daily lives, and also to take that action to cause others around us to also do that introspection and call them out when they are not willing to acknowledge their wrongs and where they're not willing to acknowledge their injustices, especially in the workplace. And so my action has been more of addressing these issues, calling people out when need be in a professional manner, but also in a manner that helps them to really accept ownership of their behavior versus just trying to keep things sort of PC. And also, you know, marching and protesting and writing to politicians and being on that front line, because especially like the hardest thing for me, I think, was the George Floyd incident and hearing him call for his mama. And as a new mom myself, you know, just sympathizing and empathizing with that pain, you know, of knowing that life that you grew in your womb is taken from your child and they're calling out for you and you cannot help them. So I think that's something that sat pretty heavily with me. And from there, you know, my goal was to really, you know, sit with women more, figure out what their issues are, help them fight the injustices that are around them, and also to use their own voice and to advocate for themselves.
Thank you so much. Dr. Paule, I hope you are still there. I am not seeing you on the screen.
I'm right here. Can you hear me?
We can, yeah, there you are. Okay, yes.
Well, thank you so much thank you for the invitation. I couldn't agree more with my co-panelists on everything that has been said. I mean, as a Black woman, I'm still angry, still very upset and sad about the, you know, the past events and the past 4 years, everything that we have witnessed. But as Dr. Nichols said, it's time for action. And one of the things that I personally been working on is trying to figure out ways to turn that anger into actionable items that I can address and work towards the social justice theme that we're discussing today. You know, also like sharing my own story of social injustices that I have experienced, and just being open to having conversation with friends and others about areas that they seem to be unaware of, that, you know, we as minorities are facing every day. And I think that the past events have just created an opportunity for us to have these conversations, and I'm so glad that we are here and that we are having this conversation today. And I hope that, you know, it becomes the beginning or a door, an opportunity for, you know, for people to reach out and really talk about these issues.
Thank you. Mel, you'll take the next question.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Joseph. This definitely is like an opportunity to open those doors and have like these much needed conversations. So one of the first things we wanted to think about would be how would you guys define social justice, or what does social justice look like to you? I think we can go in reverse order. So Dr. Joseph, if you want to kick us off.
Sure. So, you know, we've been hearing a lot about social justice, and I like to think about social justice as fairness. You know, it's many times it's like, you know, the fairness that we need to think about, that needs to exist in healthcare, employment, housing, and many more areas. You know, like discrimination and social justice are incompatible. And that is something that we must be aware of. And there are so many areas we need social justice and so many principles that we need to address. Human rights, access, participation. We see so much disparities on the day-to-day, on the places that we navigate, whether it's work or out in different places that we're in. So in terms of just social justice, I think that we really need to think deeply about the concept of fairness.
Thank you for sharing. It was really powerful. The discrimination and social justice are incompatible. Jasmine, do you have any thoughts or reflections on that?
Yes. So, can you hear me? Okay. So to me, I think social justice, similar to what Paule was saying, is equal rights and equitable opportunities for everyone. And so that ranges starting with even the basic need of like the same access to food in different neighborhoods. In our BIPOC communities, you see a lot more fast food restaurants and like a stop and shop kind of supermarket versus supermarkets that have more organic and nutrient dense foods. And so then that perpetuates health disparities right from the beginning, because if that is all you're exposed to, as a provider, if we're trying to teach about nutrition and eating a healthy diet and combating diabetes and hypertension that runs rampant in BIPOC communities, it is very hard to have that change take place if there is none of these foods available in your neighborhoods. Equal access to treatment is also a big thing. If you have public transportation issues trying to get to various doctors or specialists, then how can you really take control of your health, despite the efforts that you're putting in yourself? Or if you don't have equal access to childcare, especially for single mothers, then especially now in this COVID time, if you're not able to bring your child with you into the office because of risk of exposure, then how can you really take on your own health? So there's tons of issues, I think, but at a basic level, I think social justice means equal rights and equitable opportunities for all. And that starts with basic human rights and meeting basic human needs.
Thank you so much for sharing. Dr. Nava?
Yes, for me, social justice is about the ability to be free. So being free of discrimination, free of living in fear, the freedom to choose what one's American dream looks like, and each of us having opportunities to move forward. The problem occurs when people are treated differently or there's varying access to resources. So in healthcare, we see how COVID-19 disproportionately affected minorities, and healthcare access is not the same for everyone. And this is especially true for the Latino community, who continues to have the lowest rates of insurance across the country and access to primary care. So we can see how this is really even more of a burden on our community, especially during the time of COVID. So a world that is just would have one that we have national policies that address disparities in care and education and housing, just to name a few, but we would also have institutions that would be accountable for ensuring that their organizational structures are fair.
Very valid. Thank you so much for sharing. Valerie?
To me, social justice is recognizing the problems that face different groups of people in our society, and recognizing what systems of oppression are causing suffering and perpetuating suffering. So like the other panelists had mentioned, these really broad-ranging issues such as housing and healthcare discrimination, recognizing as nurses, like we see when we have patients in the hospital who have varying socioeconomic statuses, we tell them to go home and take your medicine, make sure you eat healthy food, and follow up with all of these things. But like Ms. Perez said, what are the barriers to people being able to access those? And in the time of COVID, recognizing the systems that have been building to this point of collapse, right, where a for-profit healthcare system is putting hundreds of millions of people's lives at risk, and not being able to pay for coverage means a death sentence for so many people in our country. So addressing these problems, I think, takes a lot of humility, which I'm constantly trying to learn and practice in these spaces. So listening to what those closest to the pain have to say about the solutions, and listening to and recognizing the way that certain groups of people have been marginalized by their race or gender expression or sexuality or ability, and putting in the work to change the conditions that perpetuate oppression.
Thank you for sharing, Valerie. And Dr. Nichols, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm still here. I'd like to frame my remarks as to how I define social justice in terms of an experience that I had. I had the privilege of being a member of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, led by Dr. Reverend Desmond Tutu, when they were dealing with the remnants of apartheid in South Africa. And I sat through 2 weeks of hearings. And one of the things that I was stunned by was the realization that apartheid was able to be implemented and controlled by the fact that other folks did not see the Africans as human beings. They did not respect or understand their humanity. And so if you don't believe or perceive, regardless of race, ethnicity, or gender, that I'm human, then you treat me like an animal. And so based on that experience, what I realized, fundamental to social justice is understanding that human beings, regardless of sex, race, gender, ethnicity, deserve respect and dignity when you interact with them. So fundamental to social justice is respect and dignity for the human condition. And I think all of the examples that have been stated are how that gets played out in reality and in practical reality. But to me, the key is respect and dignity. And if you can interact with people wherever you find them in their stations in life with respect and dignity, that's a very fundamental essence of social justice.
Thank you so much. Wow, I'm already just in awe of your responses, and we're just getting started. So when I read your bios, and when Mel and I introduced you to our attendees, clearly your resumes, your CVs, implicitly and in some areas explicitly speak volumes around social justice, though you may not have even called it that early in your career. At what point in your life, your career, did you see yourself working in the social justice space? At what point did that come to a realization for you? And also share with us what working in social justice looks like for you. And we'll start with Dr. Nava for fairness and equity.
Thank you. So I think during my life, I am Mexican American, and every achievement that I've done, it's always a surprise that, oh wow, you're Mexican and you're moving on and you're getting advanced degrees and progressing. And I think it would be a little hurtful to hear that, because it's like, well, being a Latino, being Mexican specifically, it shouldn't be a reason where people are surprised. And I think in the past, when we've seen Mexicans in the public media being shown as negative connotations, I think it kind of highlighted the need to make sure that other Latinos advance. And as I keep going forward, I bring up, opportunities for advancement for other Latinos as well. So I think my work with the National Association of Hispanic Nurses is very important to me, because I want to see our community be successful and become leaders and be advocates of social change. So really the work, is personal, but at the same time, I've had a lot of help within the organization of others who've pulled me up. So the organization means a lot to me, and I'm so happy that a lot of them joined today to be a part of this discussion as well.
Thank you, Dr. Nava. Valerie, at what point did you know that social justice work was in your future?
I think nursing inherently is a pretty political career and profession to take on. It is recognizing, like Dr. Nichols actually just very eloquently put, recognizing the dignity of all humans and working to make sure that you recognize that in all of your interactions with patients. And I think knowing a way to get involved, I think that started with me was recognizing things that I considered my strengths, things that I really liked doing, and wondering how can I apply this to a movement that is in need of more bodies and more people. And I think it has a lot to do with considering what your strengths are, and then listening and showing up and doing your homework on what are the pertinent issues in your neighborhood, in your community, in the city you live in, and then getting involved in an organization. So finding like-minded people who are also motivated to put in the work and make change happen, and building relationships ultimately with the people around you. So as a former Penn student and a current resident of Philly, I was drawn to the abolitionist collective of Police Free Penn. And their main mission is to interrupt and end the policing of West Philly by disbanding the Penn Police Department by 2025. As many of us know, the protests over the summer happened in Philly as well, and at 52nd Street, there was a really brutal attack of the Penn Police, involving the Penn Police, but predominantly of the Philadelphia Police, on the residents of West Philly near Malcolm X Park. A mile-long stretch of the neighborhood was tear gassed by police. And recognizing, the privilege that I have as a prior Penn student gives me access to a lot of different resources and a lot of different connections and relationships that I can use and leverage to make the community around me, by listening to the leadership of Black voices, by using those resources to work towards a more just community for myself and the people around me. So I guess, long story short, just finding what strengths you bring to the movement, and then getting plugged in.
Thank you. You do not need to shorten your story, Valerie. We want to hear all of it. Dr. Paule, at what point in your life did you know you were going to walk this social justice walk?
Well, I actually was reflecting on that question when I got it, and and one of the things that came up to me was like, realizing that I was born in an injustice world, and a world filled up with injustice, and just knowing that I needed to commit myself to, one, succeed and bring other people along with me. And I think that, as Adriana mentioned, just as we, people are surprised as well. I'm originally from Venezuela, and being surprised that I'm Black in Venezuela and I speak Spanish, and the accomplishments that I've been able to have, and and that shouldn't be happening at this day and age, and that's extremely sad that we still being, individuals are still surprised about, these things. But so to me, it's going back to like the definition of social justice that we had in terms of fairness and equity, and be able to bring people along with me be able to work with like-minded individuals. And one cause that I have several causes that are very important to me. I'm also a member of NAHN. I think in my bio you mentioned my work in Ghana when the Amazing Grace Children's Foundation, which is one of the works in which we are committed to building a children's hospital to bring access to healthcare in remote areas of Ghana. But as a scientist, it's also some of the work to be able to increase the number of women in STEM and minorities in STEM. So there's other organizations that I'm part of in which we're committed to doing this work. And I didn't label it as social justice, as you said. Now that I think and reflect back on so many of the things that I've been involved in, they've always been about creating equity. I always say that one of the big creator of disparities is the lack of knowledge. And if we have that knowledge, we have to share it. So for me, it's very important that whatever information I get, that I share within the community, at least to provide, an opportunity for someone to think about it. And if it's not for them, it will be for their kids or for their grandchild, but someone will benefit at the end.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paule. Dr. Nichols, share with us when you saw that you were going to walk this social justice walk.
Yes, I saw it when I entered kindergarten, in that I was born and grew up in Maine, and Maine is the most white, in quote, state in the nation, 99% white. And so from the very beginning, in my experience, I've usually been the only one, the only Black. And early on, really had to deal with what I would call stereotypes. I mean, I remember from kindergarten, all my friends, they would talk about, well, if we mix, flour and sugar and make a paste, then you can be white like us. That's a child's perspective, that I was different and they didn't know how to deal with it and know how to accept me, but to make me be like them. And so what I discovered along the way, that one of the roles that I inadvertently played out was breaking the stereotypes in the space that I was in. So I recall in both elementary and in high school, because I was very good at math and science, algebra, geometry, physics, chemistry, they, meaning the teachers, thought somebody else was doing my work. In other words, the assumption was I did not have the intellectual capacity on my own to actually understand arithmetic and mathematics. And in my nursing career, at the time I entered nursing, the schools were segregated. I went to school in Boston, Massachusetts General Hospital. At the time I was there, they took 2 Blacks in even-numbered years and 3 Jewish girls, because it was all women at that time, in odd-numbered years. So I don't know why they had to control the number, but they did, as an example. And so the stereotypes, again, which was perpetuated, was that certainly for the Negro students, as we would call them, were not sufficiently intelligent necessarily to get through a nursing school curriculum. So what I've learned along the way is that breaking, if you will, the stereotypic notions and the myths and the racist ideology about what it means to be a person of color in this country is significant. So although I did not necessarily march what I learned early on. In the space that I found myself, I made it a very real difference because I challenged folks to have to deal with me, my intelligence, my understanding, my commitment, my passion, and that I wasn't an aberration. I was representative of colored folks along the way. So I would say that social justice concept, I didn't call it that at the time, but as I reflect on it, it has been with me, I guess, all my life, because I have been, quote, in so many situations, the first, the pioneer, the trailblazer, the only one. And when you find yourself in that position, you ultimately have to deal with breaking down the barriers of stereotypic notions that keep you in your place.
Thank you, Dr. Nichols. And we'll have Jasmine give the last on this question, but I do want to just respond quickly. I'm a fan of all of the panelists. I think I should have started by saying fangirl. I think that's what the young people say. But I'm particularly heartened to have Dr. Nichols, whose career spans 4 decades and has been the first in so many areas of nursing and inside of nursing and outside of nursing. I'm particularly in that we have a number of students on the call who still experience some of the things that Dr. Nichols experienced decades ago. She's such an example of someone who can break the barriers. So I hope students on the call are listening and taking notes of her stories because it's quite important. I felt I needed to interject there. Jasmine, when did you get this calling to walk in the social justice space?
So definitely a hard act to follow after Dr. Nichols, but I definitely agree. Definitely feeling your fangirl here as well. I don't think I ever kind of acknowledged my work as social justice either until recently. I think concepts definitely evolve over time. And from a young age, I always kind of referred to my actions and my work, my calling as breaking barriers and bridging gaps. And I still refer to my work that way. It's just now that this social justice term has become so popular that we give it a different name. I think from a young age, uneven distribution of resources was very apparent to me, especially as I watched my elders struggle with access to healthcare and language barriers. I always referred to myself as kind of a silent killer because I would go with them to different appointments and kind of sit in the backgrounds. And I was always studying, and so I had a different kind of knowledge than I think most would have expected at the time. And I would kind of watch and wait to see how my family was treated, and then at the end kind of interject with my knowledge and kind of silently kill some of the stuff that was happening. Throughout nursing school, definitely faced different challenges there too. I think the nursing school now is much more diverse and much more aware. But occasionally, you get different experiences, and mostly in clinical and with different clinical instructors. And I still hear from students now about different things. But one of the main things was I always had to be that voice for the Latinx population whenever things like diabetes or even I grew up well below the poverty line in the projects in the South Bronx. So whenever we discussed a lot of these things, it was always oh, well, Jasmine, what do you think? And how do you think we can change this? And it was always kind of being that target, but I had to kind of change that and interject different things in there to show people that, yes, that is my background, and those issues do affect some of the Latino population, but it does not define us, and it is not everybody. And I still do that to this day when these issues arise. especially dealing with like interpreter issues for patients, making sure we're using language lines and iPads rather than just grabbing me to be the interpreter for someone or a family member or things like that, because it's not adequate informed consent and it's not fair to the patient. So things like that. I think even today, bridging the gap for me is always going to be making sure that we're fighting for equitable access to resources, that we're meeting people where they are instead of with our biases and prejudices about their background, where they come from, how they speak, things like that, that I have noticed over time kind of marginalizes groups from the jump. And then their care is different. It's just different. So just kind of being the voice for the little microaggressions and the little injustices that lead to bigger problems in the end.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you all for sharing your personal experiences and perspectives about social justice. I found it like really powerful hearing everybody's personal stories and the ways in which they encountered adversity. So, and I'm sure many other people in our audience feel the same way. And kind of going along those lines of like perspectives and experiences, one question is, from your perspective, what do you believe has been nurses or nursing's greatest impact and contributions to social justice? Or what are like current contributions that are really impactful, and where and how do we go from there? Sorry, and kind of going like reverse order again. I think we start off with Jasmine this time.
So nursing's greatest past contributions to social justice, I think, just transcend from meeting humanity where it is. You know, I think that's one of the greatest aspects of our profession. You know, we meet people in their most vulnerable states, and we do our best to give them the best care we can give, but also to really reach at the heartstrings of their entire being versus just a healthcare situation like a burn or an injury, like bridging gaps for families and being that voice of communication. So I think that's one of our greatest past contributions, and it continues to this day. In regards to where do we go from here, I think definitely doing more research in marginalized communities and asking about the needs specifically, listening instead of reacting, collecting pertinent data, and addressing family care models when caring for patients. I think advocating for diversity at all costs, creating scholarships in particular for women of color, to encourage them to enter the nursing field and the medical field, to enter STEM, to enter research, because I don't think it's advocated enough in our BIPOC communities. And I think we have several role models, and it's just a matter of pairing these role models and different mentorship capabilities so that we can definitely bring the younger generation up with us and just continuing to truly be the face of change.
Thank you for sharing. Dr. Nichols?
Yes, I would like to give a historical perspective, which I think is an interesting perspective. The American Nurses Association was segregated, and there was a point in time that Blacks could not join the Nurses Association at the state level, and so they created their own, the National Association of Black Nurses. And in the interest of dealing away with segregation and discrimination, at the end of World War II, the National Association of Colored Graduate Nurses went to the ANA and said it would dissolve in the interest of unity and dealing away with segregation if ANA would promise to find a way to include nurses of colored nurses into all levels of the association, and if ANA would continue to give the National Association of Colored Graduate Nurses Award, which was the Mary Mahoney Award, which was created to honor the first Black graduate nurse in America. And the American Nurses Association said that they would do this. So in 1943 or 4, I don't remember the exact year, the National Association of Colored Graduate Nurses was dissolved, and colored nurses then were admitted into the association. However, many southern states refused to take Black nurses. In 1964, Mississippi was the last state. Mississippi and Georgia were the last two states to admit Blacks. So think about that. I was elected ANA president in 1978, but up until 1964, there were still states in the United States that did not accept colored nurses. So I think it is important from a structural standpoint that that happened. And the perspective that I like to make in that regard, that I learned from my role of serving as the Chief Executive Officer of the Commission on Graduates of Foreign Nursing Schools, which is an international company, is that 2/3 of the world is non-white and non-Christian. And the 23 million nurses in the world who provide care are not white. The majority are women of color. And in America, we have this, what I call this skewed perspective. But, you know, China has a billion population and the Chinese nurses are not white. India has a billion population and the nurses of India are not white. So I just want to remind you that in many instances, the majority of nurses are women of color and that we can learn much from them. So I always like to give that sort of broad perspective because we see things through the American lens. And although the American lens is a significant one and an important one in terms of advancing the profession, I just like to remind people that nursing is really very colorful in terms of the number of people of color who are in the profession. So that would sort of be my final point.
Thank you for sharing and giving us like the more holistic and international perspective too, because it's a very global relationship. We tend to Americanize and just focus it in like as long as it's important to us. So I'm really thankful for your perspective. It got my gears going. Dr. Paule.
Thank you. You know, I would like to say, I think going off what Jasmine and Dr. Nichols mentioned, you know, we must dismantle structural racism. We need to address the, you know, racism that exists within our profession. And, you know, as a woman of color and as a nurse scientist, I go back to thinking about George Floyd, the I Can Breathe. You know, when he said those words, and those resonates loud and clear as many nurses and many nurse faculty of color who can breathe, experiencing racism and microaggressions daily. And, you know, I think that, you know, the video that we showed, that was shown earlier, shows so many leaders and so many current leaders who are doing so much, and we need ourselves. There's so many people who are actively working in the area of social justice, but we need to really look within the profession and see the experiences that many nurses of color are going through every single day, whether it's at the bedside and And remember sharing at some point, like, being discriminated against because I was a woman, from patients because of, I was a woman of color that didn't want to be treated by a person of color. That still continues. And, as a faculty member, like, what are the disparities that, faculty of color are experiencing in terms of, tenure system? There was a recent article that was published in Cell, like this week, primarily addressing, some of the things that are affecting Black scientists, and in terms of funding, in terms of the disparities that are being experienced, that at times make them to leave science. So, we need to do the research that Jasmine mentioned, but what are the barriers that are contributing for us to do those type of work and for others to do that type of work? We need the community that is so needed. So I encourage everyone to really think of, the responsibility that we have to be anti-racist and not necessarily not racist. And what does that mean? And what does that look like? So I really think that we need to continue to look within the profession to dismantle the barriers and the bricks that many of us find. So it's not about, going through the glass ceiling. Sometimes you go through the glass ceiling and there's another, brick wall behind that. So, those things are real. The experiences that Dr. Nichols shared are real and continue to exist. And we must acknowledge those as a profession.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Paule. Next will be Valerie.
I really appreciate, Dr. Paule, how you basically said we need to get our own house in order before we can address anything else. I think going off of that, we as nurses have a very strong call to duty to question the way that things are currently. As an inpatient nurse, I think there are a lot of chances for nurses to intervene as advocates for their patients. So on an individual level, advocating for what is just in a situation can often mean questioning, is it right for this Black patient who is in a sickle cell crisis to be denied pain while they're in the middle of a crisis? Like, how is this person being treated? How have I seen these situations play out? Who is the person who is suffering the most time after time? And how do I use my own position to advocate for better care for my patient? And I think, empowering nurses, or nurses rather, taking control of a situation and working with other nurses to drive policy within hospital settings and elsewhere as well is really important because we deal so closely and so intimately with our patients. It's such a privilege to be in that role, and it's our duty to speak up for what we're seeing and to listen to what the patients are saying. I also want to give voice to the labor movement within nursing. So in order for nurses to best advocate for themselves in the profession, making sure that we have enough staff in hospitals and nursing homes, wherever nurses work, that we have safe conditions to practice in, especially during COVID, during a pandemic, making sure that we're heard and that we are getting our PPE demands met, that we are being paid adequately for the nursing care that we provide, and that our voices are listened to. So the work of unions and the work of people advocating for safer working conditions for nurses and healthcare professionals, I think, is integral to making sure our patients are taken care of as well.
Most definitely. Thank you so much for sharing. And then last would be Dr. Nava.
Yeah, Valerie, I totally agree with the call to duty of frontline nurses especially. And as we know, nurses, we always show up, and even when people are scared or there's limited resources, such as the PPE shortage due to the pandemic, nurses were still coming to work and delivering care. And I was very proud of a lot of the work and the courage that they had, and just seeing with my friends the social media posts of them still going in and making sure that our patients were safe. Definitely a call to duty and great contribution that nursing has done, especially during the pandemic now. As we know, nurses are essential, and we are the largest workforce in the country, so we play a major role in the past and even going forward. Valerie, you also mentioned about nurses being involved in policy within their organizations, which is also great. I think joining committees and making sure their voices are heard when hospitals or what other setting that they're working in are looking to implement policies, their voice is essential for us to make sure that care is being delivered fairly across the board. I would also like to see more nurses involved in local, state, and national level policy development. We typically see that physicians have taken the lead and have their voices heard, but it'd be nice to have nurses front and center and giving advice or playing a role in decision making for policy. And I'm really happy to see that we have 3 congresswomen serving our communities in Illinois, Texas, and Missouri. So it'd be nice to see additional ones and even Latino nurses kind of get involved in that type of leadership in health policy.
Thank you for sharing. Those were the questions that we had prepared, and before going into questions from the audience, we were just wondering if you guys had any final comments for our audience, and in particular our nursing students who came in attendance. I think we can start with Valerie.
I'm really grateful for this opportunity to speak and meet all of you virtually. I just want to end with a quote by Mariam Kaba, who is a powerful, amazing, inspirational abolitionist. Let this moment radicalize you rather than lead you to despair. So if the events of the last year have taught you anything, it's been a call to action. And I think this is the time, especially as nursing students, to recognize the immense privilege that we have at this institution, whether it's access to resources, the ability to network with each other, and the ability to talk to incredible faculty who have tons of wisdom. How can you use that to serve the community around you? And if you're in Philly, I highly recommend to support the work of abolitionist groups such as the Black Philly Radical Collective, and if you can, you're able to redistribute your money to people and groups in the name of economic justice, and find out what your skills are and find a way to get involved.
Thank you so much. Dr. Nichols?
Well, I don't, I guess I'm not familiar with things in the Philadelphia area since I live in Wisconsin. So I would just say it would be important, if you're not involved in the professional association, you should be, because it identifies many areas of need where nurses can participate, not only for their own personhood, but also for particular groups in the community. So I think I would just make a general statement to that effect.
Thank you. Dr. Nava?
Sure. In the beginning, Dean Villarreal mentioned, quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And as we can see that even though the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, we still have a lot of work to do as nurses in the realm of social justice and bringing equality across the country. So for the students, it's really important as you embark in your journey and your mission going forward to keep your own mental and spiritual health healthy and have balance, because eventually over time, if you don't prioritize your health, it'll be very difficult to have a career where you're targeting social justice. And we can't do this work alone, and we need the support of others, because this is really a life's work. And this is why we have our alumni network, and we're here for you. So feel free to reach out whenever you need to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nava. Dr. Paule?
Absolutely. Reach out. And, as I probably mentioned before, don't stay silent. Speak up. I think it always makes me think of Martin Luther King Jr.'s this particular quote that our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. And I think that as we having this conversation and continue to have this conversation, it is critical that we don't stay silent, that we speak up, that that we are showing up, and that although we may be afraid at times to say something, but it's critical that we do say something when we show up at those tables where our voices need to be heard. And create a platform, join a platform. There's so many organizations that we all belong to, and if you're not sure what that is, especially for the student, what that is for you yet, just try. Just speak with one of us. I'm certainly reachable, so I'm happy to talk to students all the time, but do not stay silent.
Thank you, Dr. Paule. And to close us out, Jasmine. I think you're muted.
That again. So I would say this work is difficult and requires all of us putting our skill sets and resources together to really affect change. I would say do not shrink yourself for fear of repercussion. I think that's something that really affects nursing students, and I've mentored several nursing students in that regard. If there is something that hits your gut and does not feel safe and does not feel good, definitely use your voice and advocate for yourself. It will probably be the scariest thing you ever do, and I recognize that, but it will make things better for all of those who come after you. Because in shrinking down and not sharing your experience, it allows the offender to assume their behavior is okay, and then the behavior continues. And this is something that I've seen play out since I was a student back in 2004, and then throughout my career as the president of the Association of Latino Alumni, and I'm still actively involved with the university. So I think my other kind of pearl of wisdom would be to find your community. Venture outside of the nursing school. I know the nursing school is hidden behind a building, kind of lost in the shuffle, and you can lose yourself in your schedule, especially if you're in your clinical rotations, and other students will never understand because their schedule is just not as busy. But find your community. My community was the Arch Building, Macu, Patch, La Casa Latina, New Spirit of Penn Gospel Choir, and Greenfield Intercultural Center. And that was my rock to always fall back on, when things just didn't seem right at home in the nursing school, or I just needed that extra support. So definitely find your support and lean on them, and create your community so that you always have that to fall back on. You can bounce your ideas and experiences off of others, and they can guide you. And obviously, I'm always available as well. I mentor students all the time. I'm a member of Lambda Theta Alpha Alliance Sorority Incorporated, and I'm actively involved with my sorority sisters as well. And I think La Casa Latina and the Greenfield Intercultural Center always pair me with students that need some extra guidance. So I'm very happy to continue to do that. That's part of my life's work.
Wow, just so full. So we are turning to our Q&A portion. We have a few minutes to address a couple of questions. We won't get to all of them, but I do think in their responses that our panelists responded to some of the questions that are submitted. Lots of gratitude in the chat for you all, and particularly for the history lesson that Dr. Nichols shared with us. Our first question, and I do have to give this guest a shout out, comes from Penn Nursing Dean Emerita, Afaf Malis, our 5th Dean for the School of Nursing. So welcome, Dean Malis, and thank you for joining us. And this goes to anyone on the panel, so we don't have to do a round robin. Can you address the best ways to think about the intersectionality of injustices created by sexism, racism, nationalism, and other isms. How to ensure attention to all when we try to enhance inclusiveness? It's a great question. I'm not surprised it came from former Dean Afaf, and any of the panelists. Feel free to respond. Maybe one or two of you. Jasmine, are you going to respond?
I was actually just rereading her question.
Okay.
Hi, Elise. I miss you.
Dr. Paule. Oh, yes.
I would definitely say one thing that I think we're doing a better job, and we still need to continue addressing with the intersectionality of injustices, is using preferred pronouns and asking ahead of time on patient forms, how would you like to be addressed? What is even your preferred name and pronoun? Because I feel like that in and of itself helps us to meet a patient where they are and not necessarily kind of create a negative experience that will impact the rest of their care. I think that's one thing that we're doing and that needs to continue evolving to help us address some of these isms.
You got a way to go from her there. Way to go, Jasmine, is the response. There was another question that I do think is important. It might be the last question that we do. I had it here and I've just lost it. Here we go. So what advice do you have for white colleagues who want to have those difficult conversations around race in order to improve professional relationships with minorities? We didn't quite address that in the conversation. So if any of the panelists have some advice for the audience.
I think a lot of times the brunt of this type of work, justice work, inclusivity, I think a lot of times the answers, people look to people who are experiencing oppression for the answers a lot, and that fundamentally can be really draining and exhausting and unfair. So I would say to, especially in the institution of Penn, to the white people who take up, are a part of the organizations or institutions, a lot of resources, I don't want this to come off as condescending, but a lot of resources are online and free and can save, your marginalized colleagues a lot of effort and labor. So there's some really wonderful books out there. There's So You Want to Talk About Race by Adriana, I apologize if I'm saying her name wrong, but Oluo. That's a really wonderful place to start. And I think in all settings, if you're able to just reflect on yourself and take a step back and listen to what people have been saying, and not just in the nursing space, but just in general, look for resources and take time to listen is always a good place to start.
Thank you, Valerie. Others on the panel, what advice would you give to white colleagues?
So I just want to add, I think that, often we're asked to do implicit bias training, and sometimes it seems to be like a chore for some individuals. I would say, maybe taking some time to really do the implicit bias training and just reflecting on those answers. I know that, as Valerie mentioned, it could be taxing, to be, when someone is reaching out, or a lot of people are reaching out at the same time. From, at least personally, I like people reaching out and asking me questions, and I like to share my story, and I like to have those conversations. So I release just asking the individual if, are you okay having this conversation? Can you guide me to some resources if they're not, and if they don't have the space emotionally to have that conversation right, at the time that, you may feel like you're ready to have that conversation. So, sometimes it's not like we don't want to have the conversation, it's just like we're emotionally drained. So, but still just acknowledging that, I understand that this might be difficult for you. But, would you mind if I ask you a few questions, because I want to understand this better, just the way that, how my interactions with you and others. And if they're not willing at that time, don't think that it's like, they're just rejecting. It's just more of like, maybe it's just not the right time at that moment. But definitely reach out. I would say, again, I would say I'm always open to having these conversations and sharing stories. And if that's something that you want to do, just simply reach out.
And I would like to add that volunteering as well with different organizations that have different missions and serve underserved communities, that might be a great way to kind of actually be in there learning about the culture, learning about the work that's being done, and then even speaking to individuals who are working on that mission would be really helpful to gain a different perspective, but at the same time actually being in practice and doing.
Thank you so much. Dr. Nichols, I don't want to forget that you're on the phone. Do you have anything to add? Maybe you have the last response to helping white colleagues. Yeah.
Yes, I have 2 points. The first is what white folks tend not to understand is that it's information for them, but it's our lived experience. And so that's what makes it difficult. They want to interact with us to get information, but it's our lived experience, and they don't know how to acknowledge that. And the way to acknowledge it is to have social interaction with your friends of color. And so I ask white folks, do you go to coffee with your colleague? Have you invited them for lunch, for dinner? Have you gone to a movie with them? Do you have any kind of social interaction? Because without that social interaction, it's a very sterile, cold opportunity from an interaction standpoint. So I think it behooves white folks to reach out in a way to socialize with blacks, because the reverse doesn't work. White folks don't accept, usually, invitations socially from blacks. So I think that dynamic keeps the struggle going around misinformation. So the simple things like, let's go to coffee together if you're working, or let's plan to have lunch, or hey, what are you doing after work? Can you join our group? And I would ask you, look around and see how much that happens with your white colleagues and with your colleagues of color. And what I have experienced is that like colored folks, like white folks, tend to go into their own groups rather than reaching out. So it has to be intentional.
Thank you so much. Perfect. Well stated. And we are at time. What a wonderful way to end the work week, if your work week has ended, to end the Friday. A virtual thank you and hand clap to our esteemed and stellar panelists. I hope you are as able as I am. This is about the time, if we were in person, where we would go gather for a reception with some food and drink. But we'll just have to settle for being filled with wisdom and brilliance. Thank you to the audience for spending this hour and a half with us. We hope that you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed spending it with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.